Revenge with Karen.
Why is my name on $1 million policy no one's ever mentioned to me? That was the first thing I heard from the new CFO, Ryan Sharp, loud enough that half the damn floor probably heard it too. He was standing outside my cubicle, holding a printed copy of the cyber liability binder like it was radioactive. Who the hell is Jessica Brandt, and why does everything go through her? I raised my hand without looking up from my screen. Hi, that's me. Also, you're holding it upside down. It wasn't even 9:15. See, most people don't know what a director of risk and controls actually does. They just assume we're the ones who tell them their favorite free Chrome extension is a security risk and ruin everyone's fun. But my job was simple, really. I kept Iron Veil Systems from crumbling under its own delusions of invincibility. Ryan was still doing his TED talk impressions in the exec lounge and ordering branded hoodies for product marketing. I was the one handling our internal control certifications, tracking vendor risk profiles, validating attestations, and keeping our cyber liability policy clean enough that Echelon Insurance didn't triple our premiums after that scare in 22. Basically, it was the invisible glue holding the brittle backend together, while everyone else chased hypergrowth like it was a personality trait. But no one throws a parade for the woman who color codes the third-party risk logs or catches expired SOC2 reports in vendor files. No one throws confetti when you prevent a 7-figure fine with a single bullet point in a compliance checklist. You just quietly become essential. And then, over time, invisible. Before we go any further, real quick, if you're one of the 93% of folks who listen to these stories without subscribing, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it helps more than you know, and it motivates the whole team to keep digging up these crazy tales of corporate chaos. And hey, if you enjoy watching people in power step on rakes they themselves planted, toss a like on this one. Back to it. The funny part? I liked being invisible. Gave me freedom. I built my own little kingdom inside the machine, custom access dashboards, calendar automations, risk heat maps that looked like candy if you squinted. No one questioned me because no one understood what I did well enough to argue, and I never missed a deadline. Not once. Especially not the big one, the annual risk control attestation for our cyber insurance policy, one that had to be submitted using a secure credential tied to my company email and two-factor token. Every April, like clockwork, I'd do the full audit sweep, vendor controls, internal access logs, user entitlements, data loss prevention policies, then compile it all into the attestation packet. Submit it through the secure portal. And then, most important of all, get the insurer's confirmation that coverage was extended. That process was like a ritual to me, a secret language only I spoke, and I liked it that way. Then Ryan Sharp arrived, fresh from some Ivy League MBA program with his LinkedIn buzzwords and performance theater energy. He called a meeting on his second day titled Cut the Fat, which, in hindsight, should have been my first red flag. Used phrases like legacy cost centers and ROI negative verticals while sipping protein shakes that smelled like wet mulch. I was in that meeting, sitting near the back, taking notes, watching him draw a red X over a slide that just said compliance overhead in Comic Sans. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Quietly at first, my risk reports started getting returned with passive-aggressive comments like too alarmist or we'll revisit in Q4. He sent my vendor risk matrix back with the note, why are there so many red boxes? Feels negative. I told him that red meant unresolved risk. That's literally what the color was for. He replied, can we change it to yellow or something more optimistic? I'm not kidding. This man wanted to optimism color code cybersecurity risk. Still, I did my job. I updated the insurance portal login with my new hardware token, set reminders for each attestation phase, sent audit requests to department heads, documented every step of the process, time-stamped, versioned, all squeaky clean, because I had a feeling. You learn to recognize the scent of incoming disaster when you've worked in risk this long. It smells like overconfidence, like Axe body spray on an executive who doesn't know what an endpoint vulnerability is. The real kicker, Ryan never once asked what the insurance deadline was, not even when the quarterly all-hands came up, and he bragged about how he was streamlining operations for speed and scalability. Not even when he started pulling finance analysts into meetings titled redundancy assessments. And not even when he scheduled me for one. It started with the door slams. Ryan Sharp didn't walk through the office like a normal human being. He entered spaces with a flourish, like the floor was a TED stage and every cubicle was an adoring crowd he was saving from mediocrity. He wore those weird rubber-bottom dress shoes that squeaked just enough to warn you when his ego was approaching. By week 2, he had already rebranded finance as value ops and turned our open workspace into what he called a collaboration amphitheater. Translation: he got rid of the cubicle dividers so now I could hear every one of his buzzword aneurysms in high-def stereo. "You're not getting it, man," I heard him tell our senior accountant one morning. "Perception is protection. If we look secure, investors won't ask questions." That's when I knew we were screwed. Every Friday, held what he called radical transparency stand-ups, where he'd project department metrics on a giant screen, one by one, and make people defend them like it was some kind of Roman tribunal. When it was my turn, he pulled up my Q1 risk heat map and tilted his head like he was trying to solve a puzzle made of human disappointment. "These red zones," he said, pointing with a laser pointer he absolutely did not need. "What's the vibe here? I mean, we actually on fire, or is this just your color palette?" I didn't blink. Those are unresolved third-party control gaps tied to our core customer data environments. One of them is from our SSO provider. Their SOC2 expired 3 weeks ago. Ryan grinned like he'd just spotted an opportunity to mansplain. "Okay, but what's the impact though?" "The impact," I said slowly, "is if that vendor gets breached and we can't prove due diligence, our coverage doesn't apply, we eat the full cost." He made a face like I'd just spoken Latin, then waved it off. "Let's reframe this. Doom spreadsheets don't get buy-in. We need a more uplifting narrative." He actually said that. A more uplifting narrative. I stopped bringing my own reports to those meetings. He just replaced my slides with marketing fluff anyway, pretty graphs with no context, just upward arrows and gradient fills, like we were all collectively ascending into a cloud-powered utopia. Never mind the fact that our data lake had 4 unaudited integration points, and our SOC hadn't done a full breach drill in 9 months. Every time I flagged something critical, like the missing MFA cert on our external payroll system, or the fact that our software vendor hadn't uploaded a vulnerability scan since October, Ryan either ignored it or asked legal if they could de-risk it with language. That became his catchphrase, "de-risk it with language," as if a breach would politely read our indemnity clauses before spilling customer data across the dark web. Meanwhile, I kept doing my job, quietly. I submitted the Phase 1 insurance pre-check, double-checked our 2-factor keys, sent out the access attestations for department heads to confirm. All of it under the radar, because I already knew what was coming. The nail in the coffin was the Q2 spend review. Ryan called a cost alignment summit, which, surprise, was just a spreadsheet autopsy where every department head had to justify their line items. When it got to me, he didn't even look at the numbers. He just said, "You've got a lot of invisible work, Jessica. Vendor audits, compliance reports, whatever it is you do with insurance stuff. Help me out here. Where's the direct value?" "The direct value," I replied, "is that we still have insurance." He smirked, cute. "But if we can't trace $1 of revenue to it, it's not core." The room was quiet. I looked around. People I'd worked with for years suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. Even legal stayed silent. HR shifted uncomfortably. And I realized I was already marked. From that moment, it wasn't if, it was when. And still, I did the job. I scheduled the Phase 2 audit. I cleaned up the vendor attestations. I updated the secure token registry and logged it in the insurer portal. Because you never really work for people like Ryan. You work around them until they give you the leverage to walk or burn them with it. Let's just call it what it is, a $150,000 failure. Ryan said it with a smirk, like he'd been waiting for this moment all week. His voice bounced off the glass walls of the conference room, landing like a slap across my face. 47 people on that Zoom call. Another 15 in the room. A handful trying to pretend their cameras weren't on. The kind of silence that makes your pulse louder than the AC. He held up a single-page printout. This is an email from our vendor rep confirming we let a rebate credit expire last quarter. A 6-figure credit. Gone. Wasted. Know who was responsible for tracking that?" He turned to face me directly like he was about to win an Oscar. Jessica Brandt, our so-called director of risk and controls, who's apparently too busy making doom spreadsheets to notice we left $150K on the table. The blood drained from my face, but not from fear, from sheer disbelief, because I had flagged that credit twice, once in December, once again in January, with timestamps, forwarded vendor correspondence, and a bright red note in our shared finance calendar that read, Q1 vendor credit expires 1 Ryan to initiate claim. I remember because I also wrote Ryan in all caps after legal asked me to assign ownership more clearly going forward. But none of that mattered now. Not in this room, not under these lights. He paced like a preacher in a megachurch. This is exactly the kind of dead weight that drags a company's performance metrics into the mud. Risk teams should be enabling growth, not policing it. And frankly, I don't see the value. I see legacy thinking. I see bloat. I see redundancy. He paused for effect, hands folded, dramatic as hell. And then, effective immediately, we're eliminating your role. You're free to pack your things. I heard someone in the back suck in a breath. It might have been Jill from procurement, or maybe one of the junior analysts who always smiled at me in the break room. Didn't matter. They wouldn't say anything. Not here, not to him. I looked at Ryan, not a word, no expression. Just a flicker of something. Pity? No. That would require a soul. I closed my laptop, stood up, tucked my notebook into my bag, and walked out. No scene, no protest, no last words. I didn't even look back. Only sound behind me was the faint buzz of the HVAC and a single Slack ping that someone forgot to mute. Let them feel that silence. Down the hall, past the product managers who suddenly found their shoes interesting. Past the new intern who'd asked me for help with a vendor risk matrix just the week before. Past the HR director's office, empty, of course. I got to my desk and started packing. Methodical, like I'd rehearsed it, which, in a way, I had. Not because I expected this exact betrayal, but because I'd learned long ago that jobs like mine don't end with gold watches. They end with purges, with reorgs, with someone higher up deciding you're too expensive, too inconvenient, too much of a speed bump on their personal rocket to the C-suite. I didn't download anything, didn't delete a thing, just logged out of my systems, clean, quiet, surgical. And the entire time, I knew something Ryan didn't. The attestation, final piece of the insurance renewal, the risk control attestation, still hadn't been submitted. Because it couldn't be, because it required my credentials, and the secure digital key tied to my company email, which, due to how I'd set it up for Echelon Insurance's personal attestation protocol, couldn't be transferred, cloned, or reassigned without a 6-week recertification process. One that involved me, in person. I zipped my bag, took one last glance at the office I'd kept secure for 7 years, and walked out the front doors like I was just headed to lunch. Not a single person stopped me. No one ran after me with an apology. That's the thing about quiet people in critical roles. No one realizes how deep your roots go until they try to rip you out. And by the time they feel the cracks, you're already gone. Thing about corporate machinery is it doesn't stop just because someone got unceremoniously fired. It lurches forward, powered by blind momentum and caffeine-stained spreadsheets. So after I walked out that day, the gears kept turning, or tried to. I wasn't watching the show directly. I had no Slack access, no company email. But the silence was its own kind of music. A few folks from legal connected with me on LinkedIn a week later, no message, just a quiet digital handshake. One of the finance analysts I trained on risk scoring liked a post I shared about data privacy regulations. Small things, signals, like the sonar pings of a sinking ship. Meanwhile, I'd moved on, consulting for a mid-sized firm in Portland that actually believed risk was a strategy, not a cost center. I had my own schedule, no 8 a.m. stand-ups, and no one ever asked me to color code danger in pastels. For the first time in years, I wasn't clenching my jaw while explaining to some VP why MFA wasn't paranoia theater. Then, on a quiet Wednesday, 3 weeks post-exit, I got the ping. A single notification from the Echelon security protocol system. Credentialed user alert, registered token validation, required FY 2024 cycle. I blinked at the screen, rereading it like it was a ghost whispering through fiber optic cable. Token was still active. My token, which meant the system still had me listed as the certifying authority for the FY 2024 risk control attestation. That couldn't be right, but it was. See, most companies don't bother updating access protocols until something breaks. especially for things they barely understand, like attestation structures buried in insurance frameworks. As far as the Echelon portal was concerned, I was still Jessica Brandt, Director of Risk and Controls, and the attestation, still pending. A renewal that, if not executed, would leave Iron Veil's cyber liability policy in limbo. No signature, no coverage. No coverage, no product launch, at least not without a lot more sleepless nights and legal risk filings. And guess what tied the entire thing together? A specific chain of validations, each one tracked, logged, and required to be submitted using the original secure credential. I'm stamped from the unique key device bound to my now-defunct company email. That token lived on my keychain, clipped next to my apartment fob, and the micro flashlight my niece gave me for Christmas. I hadn't thought about it since the day I walked out, but there it was, blinking green like it still had something to say. And it did. I checked the insurance portal using the public access view. No internal credentials, just what any vendor or partner could see. Sure enough, status, pending attestation. Authorized signatory J. Brandt. No reassignment, no override, not even a placeholder update. I leaned back and let out a laugh I didn't know I'd been holding. Not petty, not smug, just amused, because I knew what was happening behind those polished glass walls back at Iron Veil. Someone in finance had assumed someone else was handling the renewal forms. Probably the new junior compliance analyst, poor kid. Eagle hadn't been looped in because, hey, that was operational. HR was probably still finalizing a backfill requisition. And Ryan, he was likely too busy getting his headshots updated and brainstorming how to position our non-existent insurance coverage as a nimble risk posture in the next investor deck. All the while, the deadline ticked closer. And that's the thing about these renewals. They're not like invoices. You miss the date, you don't just get a late fee, lose the policy, or worse, you get downgraded, which in cyber liability land means your premiums go from painful to call the investors and cancel the launch. But hey, I wasn't in charge of that anymore. I'd been cut, a redundancy, a drag on performance, so I turned the ping into a reminder on my calendar. Check insurance portal status day of deadline, just out of curiosity. After all, I wasn't angry. I wasn't looking for revenge, just wanted to see if they noticed the empty chair before it caught fire. The first real ripple hit on a Tuesday, 10 days before the policy deadline, when Ryan tried logging into the Echelon portal himself. I wasn't there, obviously, but I've played the scene over in my head more times than I care to admit. Him hunched over his standing desk, chewing on a pen cap like he's about to outsmart a system built by actual engineers, fingers clacking angrily at the keyboard. Frown deepening as each login attempt ends the same way. Access denied. No authorized credential found. And here's the beautiful part. Because of how I structured the policy workflow with Echelon, the portal didn't just require an Iron Veil domain email. It required a paired token, assigned to the original signatory, with end-to-end encryption checks that couldn't be spoofed, without revoking the old credential and waiting for reapproval. Which, I might add, took 6 to 8 weeks. On a good day, if legal got involved, if Echelon didn't need to re-verify identity or re-audit access logs, none of which they'd done, because no one at Iron Veil had bothered to tell Echelon I was gone. So there he sat, Ryan Sharp, CFO and walking LinkedIn quote board, staring at a portal that may as well have been Fort Knox. His next step, IT, they ran through their script, reset the browser, tried alternate admin logins, scanned the registry for shared credentials which didn't exist because I made damn sure they didn't. Every security compliance standard I implemented had been airtight, least privilege, single point attestation, zero tolerance for shadow logins. I'd been so good at my job, I'd locked them out of it. Then legal got the call. Imagine the conversation went something like, Ryan, we can't get into the insurance portal. Who else is authorized? Legal, Jessica. Ryan, yeah, but besides her. Legal, no, Jessica. There was no besides her. See, the whole idea behind attestation protocols is that they're traceable, non-repudiable. That's why insurers started requiring secure identity keys. It wasn't about trust, it was about liability. Echelon didn't want a generic signature, wanted mine. Tied to the risk matrices I'd created, the vendor scores I'd certified, and the digital key I'd protected like it was my own damn heartbeat. I could feel the walls start to sweat from 3 states away. Their IT director, poor guy, probably tried to bluff Echelon's system with an internal override. That's when the system would have spit back a glorious message. Attestation incomplete. Certified signatory, Jessica Brandt. Contact primary token holder to proceed. They couldn't reassign the credential without invalidating the entire risk review cycle, which meant redoing every audit, rerunning every vendor compliance report, revalidating the access logs, all of which took weeks, if not months, which meant one thing: they were out of time. And I was at a coffee shop downtown, helping a startup implement their first actual risk matrix. They were grateful, curious, treated me like someone who built things, not someone they could trim out of a cost report. My phone buzzed. Another LinkedIn ping. Someone from Iron Veil Engineering, I think, liked a post I'd shared about avoiding single points of failure. The irony didn't just sing, it belted like an opera diva on fire. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I logged into the Echelon public portal again. Same message as before, just updated. Status, pending. Required signatory J. Brandt. Token validation, not yet received. And then the part that probably made Ryan punch a wall, a note at the bottom: no substitute signatories permitted. Original token authentication required. I closed the tab and poured myself a whiskey, not out of celebration, not yet, but because I knew what came next. The panic, the scrambling, the quiet realization that the drag on performance they'd fired was the only person standing between them and $1 million policy default. And in corporate America, you can survive being disliked. You can survive being underestimated. But what you can't survive, not really, is being dependent on someone you thought was disposable. Subject line: action required final confirmation prior to policy activation, FY 2024 sender. Coverage ops at Echelon.com time received. 7:42 a.m. Ryan Sharp opened the email with the confidence of a man who just ordered a very large, very public product launch and assumed the universe would obey. What he read instead was a one-sentence gut punch. Has Miss Jessica Brandt submitted the FY 2024 risk control attestation using her registered secure token credential? That's it. No fluff, no small talk, just one merciless question. Below it, in bold: response required by 5:00 p.m. EST today or policy activation will be suspended. I wasn't there to see his face, but I'd bet a week of consulting fees that the blood drained faster than you could say coverage void. Because now it was real. No more assumptions that someone else had handled it. No more denial that the missing login was probably cached somewhere. This was the insurer's final ask, the final handshake before the policy became binding. And they were naming names, not the compliance officer, not Iron Veil signatory, me. And they weren't asking if the form had been filled out. Were asking if I had personally submitted it, using my unique token, the same one Ryan had essentially thrown in the trash 3 weeks earlier with his one-man cost-cutting crusade. In that moment, the entire house of cards tilted. The launch was less than a week away, a major release that had already been teased in trade journals, previewed with select enterprise clients, slathered across their website with bold phrases like next-gen data integrity and uncompromising security. Echelon's cyber liability policy was the backbone of it all. Without that coverage, their lawyers couldn't greenlight the release. Their clients couldn't sign final agreements. The compliance rider for one of their biggest partners specifically required proof of active and uninterrupted third-party cyber liability coverage. In other words, no attestation, no launch. And now Ryan had a very clear, very time-stamped email proving that the only person in the world who could fix this was the same person he'd humiliated, fired, and erased from the org chart like she was a typo. Let that settle in for a second, because from what I later heard through back channels, that's when panic really set in. Calls to IT resumed, desperate attempts to forge access. They even tried requesting a new token through Echelon's service portal, which was denied instantly, since the only way to request a token replacement was from the active one. That's when legal was pulled into a hastily arranged compliance sync, which, by then, was really just code for how much fire are we standing in, and is there any chance it won't kill us? Their answer: unless they could get me to submit the attestation using the active credential, they'd have to trigger an emergency reassessment of all internal control systems, audit every single vendor relationship tagged in the existing policy, pause the product launch indefinitely while undergoing secondary underwriting. That would take weeks. Minimum. So they did what every company does when they finally realize the person they ghosted is now holding the fuse. They started trying to contact me. First, it was HR, a polite email asking if I could assist in closing out an outstanding credential issue. Then legal, attaching a vague authorization form and asking me to acknowledge continuity. Then the CTO, who had once asked me to explain ransomware like he was 5, texting me at 10:23 p.m. with a single line. "Hey, you up?" No, Brian. I was not. I was on a trail hike in the Columbia River Gorge, phone on Do Not Disturb, watching hawks ride thermal air currents like they owned the sky. Because while Iron Veil scrambled to duct tape their disaster, it was breathing air that didn't smell like burnt coffee and career panic. But I did see the echelon email. Same one Ryan got, same subject line, same countdown, and I smiled. Not because I was planning anything yet, but because sometimes you don't need to light a fire. You just wait, and let the cold wind tell them what happens when the wrong name gets erased. The first call came at 8:12 a.m., an unknown number from a Cleveland area code. Straight to voicemail. Another, then a flood, blocked numbers, generic HR inboxes, even one poorly disguised text from someone pretending to be just checking in as a friend. Cute. By noon, my inbox had a blinking 10+ badge, all of them some variation of "Hi Jessica, hope you're doing well. Quick question regarding an old credential or urgent contractual coverage inquiry. Please respond ASAP." One subject line just said, "Please." I didn't open a single one because I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just busy. Busy reviewing SOC 2 documentation for a client who treated my work like it mattered. Busy helping a startup CEO understand that security controls weren't just boxes to tick, but the bones of their business. Busy drinking coffee that didn't taste like printer toner. Busy being respected. And most importantly, my phone was off. Set to Do Not Disturb, 8:00 a.m. to 6:00 p.m., Monday through Friday. Because I'd built new boundaries in this new chapter of my life, boundaries that didn't include saving people who'd called me dead weight in front of the entire company. Back at Iron Veil, though, there were no boundaries left. They were unraveling. HR kept trying the friendly tone. "Hi, Jessica. So sorry to bother you. We're just wondering if you might still have access to your previous echelon credential. No pressure, of course, but we'd love your help." Legal dropped the warmth altogether. This is a time-sensitive matter that affects policy compliance, financial exposure, and may result in launch delays. Translation: please save us before our stock tanks and investors start circling like vultures. Then came the CTO. "Hey, not sure if you saw the Slack thread. We're kinda stuck here. Would love to hop on a quick call." That one made me laugh out loud. Because yes, of course I saw the Slack thread. Someone had sent me a screenshot. The highlight: "Does anyone know how to bypass a personal credential lock in echelons at a station flow?" Responses ranged from "LOL good luck" to a desperate try calling their rep and crying. Iron Veil had no plan B, because I was plan B. Just hadn't realized it until the clock started ticking loud enough to drown out their bravado. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th unanswered email, they even tried the classic Hail Mary, offering to re-engage me as an independent contractor for a limited engagement. No rate, no scope, just the assumption that I'd leap at the chance to rescue them like some prodigal compliance fairy. I didn't reply, because this wasn't about vengeance. This was about weight. The same weight Ryan had dismissed, minimized, and cut loose like I was an old Excel macro slowing down his pivot tables. Now that same weight was pressing against every meeting, every email, every whisper "do we tell the board yet?" conversation happening behind closed glass doors. I imagined the CFO started snapping at people, blaming legal, blaming IT, blaming legacy systems for not warning him, blaming everyone but himself. Meanwhile, I was walking into a quiet boardroom in Portland, laptop in hand, consulting deck loaded, ready to help a real team prepare their own policy at a station correctly, ahead of schedule, documented, compliance signed. One of the engineers at this new firm, bright kid named Max, asked how I managed high-pressure insurance deadlines in my last role. I smiled and said I submitted early. Every time. He raised an eyebrow. "No exceptions." "Only once," I said. "They're still feeling it." Back in my hotel that evening, I opened my personal inbox. One new message. Subject: credential access inquiry, immediate need. It was Ryan. Direct, no greeting, just one line: "We're prepared to compensate you for your time. Please respond ASAP. I closed the laptop, not to make a point, not to flex, but because it was 6:01 p.m. and my phone still off. I picked up on the sixth ring, not because I was eager, not because I forgave anything, but because I'd just finished a client call, had a cup of coffee in my hand, and the sun was setting in that golden way that makes you feel like you're already on the winning side of something. Jessica, hi. Ryan's voice had changed. The self-assured bark was gone. Now, he sounded like a man asking his dentist if the root canal could maybe happen without anesthesia. I let the silence hang just long enough for him to realize I hadn't forgotten. Thanks for taking the call, he said quickly. I know things ended abruptly. We're in a situation here and you need the attestation submitted, I interrupted flat. He cleared his throat. Yes, and unfortunately the system is still showing your credential as the only authorized one. IT can't override it, and legal says the reauthorization process would take 6 to 8 weeks, I finished for him. Best case. Another pause. Hated that I still knew the system better than he did, that I didn't have to ask questions, that I hadn't lost a single step. Look, he said, pivoting to his best faux casual tone, we just need a quick resolution. 5 minutes of your time and we can put this behind us. We'd be happy to compensate you, of course. I almost smiled, but instead I said, okay, I'll consider it. You could hear the tension in his shoulders unclench through the speaker. Really? That's great, thank you. I'll need a signed consulting agreement, I continued. 12-hour minimum. $5,000 an hour. Prepaid. Silence. The kind of silence that screams. The kind that makes men like Ryan realize they've wandered into a conversation they no longer control. Wow. Okay, well, that's a bit aggressive, don't you think? You fired me without cause in front of half the company, I said, still calm. Tried to erase me from a process you didn't understand. Now you're calling because your policy hinges on credentials only I possess. This isn't aggression. This is valuation. He didn't speak. I waited, stirred my coffee, watched a crow land on the edge of the balcony, cock its head, and look at me like even it knew the math was simple. I'm also going to need, I added, a formal apology, in writing, for the record. That got him. He coughed. Laughed, maybe. Weak little puff of sound like someone trying to deny reality one last time before it eats them whole. Come on, Jessica. We're all professionals here. That's right, I said. So put it in writing or don't, and let Echelon lapse your policy. Your call. Another long beat. I'll have legal draft something, he muttered. No, I said, you'll write it. You blamed me publicly, you'll apologize the same way, or you'll lose more than your policy. You'll lose your launch. Board's confidence. Probably your job. You're about one missed submission away from irrelevance. I let that settle, not loud, not cruel, just facts. Jesus Christ, he finally said. No, I replied, Jessica Brandt. But I understand the confusion. I ended the call. 15 minutes later, I had a DocuSign link from HR titled Consulting Agreement High Priority. 30 minutes after that, a PDF slid into my inbox. Subject, formal apology, Jessica Brandt. It was short, clumsy in places, probably rewritten 3 times under legal's watchful eye. But it had the essentials. Acknowledgement that I had flagged the vendor credit Ryan blamed me for. Confirmation that my risk work had been integral to operational stability. A sentence that read, the failure to recognize Jessica's contributions was mine, and mine alone. I read it once, then again. And then I clicked accept, because this wasn't revenge. This was restoration, with interest. The doors slid open like they used to every morning, but this time I didn't badge in. Security already had my name on the list.